Hello, this is Pat O'Meara, and I'm excited to have all of you joining us with this webinar on new paradigms in user-centric digital markets. We're going to be talking about APIs, apps, and AI, and I'm joined with Albert Berdellins and Kevin Cuddeback. Albert is Managing Director of Artificial Intelligence for Inveniam. Kevin is, or Inveniam AI, I should say, and Kevin is our chief data scientist, and we're talking about a ton of the news that's happening, that's coming out, that's affecting the alts world. It's affecting the trading of real world assets, and we're going to really dive into some of these really big announcements that have happened in the last couple of weeks. And why don't we just start with some quick introductions? Albert, I know you've been on here a couple times, but why don't you give us a quick introduction of yourself?
Sure. So thanks, Pat. My name's Albert Berdellins. I lead the artificial intelligence division, or I'm sorry, I lead the artificial intelligence division at Inveniam. Very excited to be here and talk about the latest news and what it means for the broader market as a whole.
Fantastic. And Albert, you've been with us for, certainly, let's say 6-ish months. Is that about right?
I think about 4 or 5 months now, and eventually, hopefully in month 6, I'll get my job title correct.
There you go. There you go. The dare to dream. And Kevin, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and the role you play here?
Sure. I joined Inveniam because there's lots of great data that we want to put on the distributed ledger. And we sort of quickly realized that the thing that real world assets were going to need was real world data on a ledger. And we went out and we did register the domain distributed Edgar as a good pun and as a good goal for what we're trying to do. If people are familiar with how Edgar supplies information for public assets on the SEC site, we need a distributed Edgar to enable sort of private market assets to trade like public ones.
And in many cases, this data, the private market data, it can't sit on chain, right? It has GDPR rules around it. It has CPPP rules around it, and we don't want to create the world's largest database, referenceable database, in order for private market assets to trade. We need to be able to surveil the data at the edge. We need to prove the provenance of that data. We need to be able to provide trust. But for the servicing of alts and real world assets, so think private equity, private credit, real estate infrastructure. This is largely unstructured data that has a lot of 10-finger automation in it as people surveil the assets, and they use bilateral data sharing. They email people this information versus everybody surveilling a browser, which is what Inveniam is, of data systems where you can surveil the assets real time. And so as you surveil the assets real time and in their data systems, you need to be able to understand, A, who has the rights to see this data, B, how do I push this data to a compute function, think any type of enterprise or legacy software system or smart contracts, because if you're going to do a capital call or a distribution, you need to know that you're pulling data from the right source. So how do you make sure that the right people are looking at this data, they're viewing this data at the edge real time, and we're credentialing that data through a series of zero knowledge proofs and similar type activities. And I'm going to maybe give a quick definition of zero knowledge proof, and then I'm going to kick it over to Kevin. But a zero knowledge proof is, Albert and I walk into a bar, right? Albert asks for a beer, and they ask for his ID, and he shows his ID, and he's somewhat gratified that in his 30s he's still getting carded, but as he shares his ID, his name, his address, his age is leaked, right? So there's data leakage in that proof. I walk into the bar, and as I sit down next to him, my white beard is the zero knowledge proof that I'm over 21, right? Like, they're not asking, they don't know my name, they don't know my age, they don't know where I live, they just know I'm over 21, right? And a zero knowledge proof is how we use cryptography to prove specific pieces of data that we can validate and we can audit, but we in no way, shape, or form allow data leakage, or that's the goal, right? And I want to talk, Kevin. We're going to go to you first, right? When we think about all of the data needed to service a private market asset, why is that important for price discovery? Why is that important to feed a smart contract? Why is that needed for private market assets to trade digitally globally?
Right. It's partly that people forgot that, when they were trading crypto, that real world assets, are a claim on future earnings. And the value of real world assets is the sum of those future claims. And we understand the value of those future claims on earnings by looking at past earnings and current earnings and current expenses. And so that was just, instead of a speculative or notional value that a Bitcoin could have, real world assets, there's a tradition that they are based on their claims on future earnings. And there weren't going to be any arbitrages, opportunities. They shouldn't, when digitized, trade for any more or any less than they would in other settings if you had the same knowledge. So we quickly learned that you couldn't put a hotel, you couldn't tokenize a hotel until you had understood, what its earnings per key were.
Yeah, and also that key is, right, what is the knowledge, right? And making sure that the knowledge is evenly distributed, right? And that everybody has the same access, they can understand what's there, because entropy is occurring on that building. You know what I mean? And if there is a fire, if it's refurbished, if it's empty, if it's full, all of those impact the cash flows, and we need to be able to surveil the asset, right? And make sure everybody has access to this. And I think that, right, there's a whole history, right? Ticker tape to, a Bloomberg machine, right? What are, you used to read it in the Wall Street Journal. How we gain access has been revolutionized over the last 100 years, right? And Kevin, maybe I'll throw it back over to you one more time as we talk about, right, data reporting, even on public securities, has gotten better and better and better and better on public, but in private, maybe not so much. Maybe if you want to hit that.
Right. I mean, in private, still too much of it is on paper, or as we used to call it, sneaker net, where a document is walked from one desk to another. And we can at least make sure that a document that once data has been validated, that validation sticks with it. The same way, once you've proved that you're 21, if you just had a card that would always be green when anytime anyone asked, then you can convey that trust without having to revalidate all the other information, to extend your analogy.
That there's dependencies on. And as we do this, I'm going to use a use case right now that we've talked about on this podcast before, where literally if you have a tax dependence tax strategy, people, in order to ensure and we need to ensure that the process by which the asset is originated, processed, and delivered into the underlying portfolio is done in a manner that preserves the tax efficiency or the tax exemption that you have. Many times that was done with postal marks. And in the UK particularly, what you had is, from origination to disposition, 37, 38-day transactions to close, because they used postal marks as a mechanism to literally send something that might be across town where the physical paper would go. And each time that physical paper moved, there was 10-finger automation, a printout, and then it would move again. And those postal marks were that mechanism to timestamp. Now, on chain, we can get that 38-day to sub 1 hour where there is timestamp. Yes, it went from this entity to this entity. There was cash transferred, and we can provide not only proof of origin of data, but proof of process. And Albert, talk to us about how AI is speeding this up. Not only is it just the transfer of the data and the processing is more efficient and the time stamping, but how is AI itself going to speed up real world assets and alts trading?
Well, it's really revolutionizing, and it feels like there's every week it's accelerating faster and faster and faster. The fact of the matter is that human beings are just not going to be able to keep up. Already, you can't keep up. There's too much data. There's too much context. You have to not only understand all the data points, but understand what impact that has in the broader ecosystem and in the broader market. And that's just impossible for a human being to do. So now what's happening is you see all these companies setting up their own AIs in whatever context they need it the most. And even more interestingly, they have AIs sitting on top of multiple systems. And we can talk about that and some recent news in a moment. But what's now occurring is everyone is thinking about what's going to happen when these AIs interact with each other. How are we going to keep things under control or set the rules of the road? And all the AI companies are focused on the controls internal to each AI to keep it behaving in the way that they want it to behave. But no one is really focused on the broader rules of the road other than regulation. How do we set up environments where the AIs are interacting with each other in a way that we can predict and a way that we want?
And I'm going to call this Tim Berners-Lee's agents, as he wrote about in Semantic Web, right? When he was writing about this, he said you would have different agents managing different functions for you as your data then interacts with other agents, right? And when there's no interaction between third parties, you can just build AI. It's going to process your own data. You get the outputs. You trust the inputs. Great. That's simple, right? I'm going to write a paper for my homework. I want to understand this. And I just ask a series of questions about the book I'm supposed to have read. Okay. What happens if we're extracting data that we need to push and we need to provide proof of origin of the data, proof of process, but then another AI agent is going to interact with that? And if we don't trust the steps or the processes or the other agents, that slows us down, right? And I want to talk for a minute about natural language AI and how that relates to all the manual operations for alts that exists. You take a $500 billion alts platform and their head of data operations. He's overseeing literally, in some cases, hundreds or thousands of people doing 10-finger automation as they're pulling data out of unstructured data and entering into systems. And by the way, then from that system to another, many times the middleware is Excel and a first-year Cornell grad, right? How is natural language processing going to impact all these manual processes?
So we'll get Kevin back in a second. I would love to hear his opinion on this. But from my perspective, it's a game changer, because you can now, in plain English, tell an AI agent, I want to do due diligence this way. Check all these things. Look at all these documents. And then whenever you need to do due diligence, you say, do it on all these different potential assets. And what's amazing about that is you don't even really need to do the first part. You can tell it, read the relevant laws, read the relevant regulations, read our standard operating procedures, understand our goals, and you come up with a due diligence process that we should do that complies with all those things and accomplishes whatever the goal is. And then you can let it optimize itself based on the results, or you can even run simulations, infinity.
And I want to say that's 2 steps down the road. Today, this week, on Thursday, AI in real time can do the vast majority of manual data operations that have historically been done by services company, let's call them fund admins, et cetera. That can happen today. And there's a ton of news about this, right? That's happening. But Kevin, when you dropped off, we really want to talk about natural language processing and how that specifically is impacting these manual solutions and how that's happening AI. Is there anything you want to add? Albert gave a very good comment on that, but anything you want to add there?
I dropped because I was trying to share the Tim Berners-Lee semantic web article, and he created this tower at the top of which were logic, proof, and trust, and that those last three elements are sort of what AI is not yet prepared to deliver. It talks pretty, but showing its logic, doing proofs, and actually delivering trust. Those last three parts. So he talked about the agents, and they do a great job of talking, chatting, performing these functions, but the world hasn't nailed the logic, proof, and trust steps.
Kevin, as we think logic, proof, and trust, in Inveniam, we have no idea what the logic is. We're clearly not smart enough to do that. But proof and trust, that's what Inveniam does. And then we go to our partners, who are the fund admins, who say, I know the logic, or the alts manager who says, I know the logic. You know what I mean? And what we're doing is saying, on behalf of our clients, let us use these AI tools and plug them in to the logic portion, right? There's a business analytics standpoint. We can work with somebody like a Bain or a Capgemini or a McKinsey and saying, hey, things that have been done that are institutional knowledge that you've been doing, we're now going to, in many ways, put down in a logic chain that we're plugging AI into real time, providing proof and trust into the origin of data into AI and the output, so that it's ready for another AI tool or a real intelligence RI tool user to use that at speed where they don't have to stop and double check everything. You know what I mean? And this is trust allows speed, lack of trust makes it slow, right? And AI is going to, how do we take this automation and move it forward, right? And right now, you have a whole bunch of people who are taking all these tools and they're building tools on demand for clients. I will build you your own tool for this thing. That is dead. If you're in that business, let us buy you, right? You are not going to be in business in another 5 years. Full stop. If you're saying to clients, let me help you, I'm going to build you a unique set of tools for your unique custom logic functions, you will be dead in 5 years. Full stop. You will be dead in 5 years. AI is going to eat that alive. I guess, Albert, why is that going to eat that alive?
Well, because you can't create an infinite number of single-use, single-purpose solutions. You just can't. And an AI can do that at scale. It can solve, asymmetric problems that are irregular, that used to be very difficult to automate. It used to be that in order to get something automated, it needed a discrete set of steps and you needed everything defined. But now with these large language models, you have a more open format ability to solve and figure out, it can figure out intuitively what needs to be done in order to solve the problem.
And we're doing this in POC today with our clients. And we've talked a little bit about this. We did a POC where we had a client and they were per asset, they were spending about 20 hours a quarter of 10-finger automation, went down to 8 hours, version 1.0, went to 15 minutes in version 2.0. We're taking 20 hours and on a single portfolio, 70 assets, that's 1,400 hours that gets automated down into 15 minutes per asset. And literally we're then going in and we're doing this proof, we're double checking everything, and we're providing proof of process, commuting trust, and delivering that into whatever that next tool is, the Aladdin, the Adapar, the eFront, or the smart contract, right? Which is going to automate some of this data. And as we think about this involves analysis, transformation, standardization, visualization, reporting, right? We're feeding all this kind of stuff. And as we do it, I want to say this again and again and again. If you are in fund admin and you are not doing this, your competitive cost burden will make you uncompetitive. And this is happening fast. But it really is logic about what the process is, right? It is process and trust. And the proof of process, and I say process, but it really is this mechanism of process that's been human. And you've said, oh, I trust a brand, right? I used to call a cab company because I trusted them. They hire good drivers. Now I literally hit a button and the gig economy delivers me a driver through Uber, right? You have a real estate asset. Your ability to use the gig economy against your real estate asset for valuations, for loans, for secondary trading of private equity, but also the administration, so you can prove all of those data points to all those people. This is what this AI is going to do. And I feel like I got just up on a soapbox there. And Albert, I want to go to what's the, we've been in this space for about 2.5 years. We invested a couple, call it $3 to $4 million, maybe as much as $5 into our AI assist tool. We needed to up our game. We brought you in. But man, everything is moving so fast, right? It's moving so much. Talk a little bit about the news that's happened in the last couple of weeks.
So you see, especially this year, this general theme of all of the big, tech companies really dropping the ball with AI, and everyone having to buy their way out of that problem and make big investments in relative upstarts. You have Microsoft with the OpenAI investment. Just a couple of weeks ago, you had Amazon announce their big investment in Anthropic, and all the way down the line. So you see, and luckily they all had the cash reserves to do it. So now what you see.
Let me add to that. Right, our partner in the Middle East, G42, that we're working with, Microsoft just invested $15 billion into G42, and G42 and their Inception and cloud product, right, with their 4 exaflop compute that's going to 32 exaflop. This is where companies, they're saying, hey, we're plugging in to not only OpenAI, but all of these, right?
Yep. So what you see is most of the companies, what they're doing is they're integrating AI into their ecosystem. So you have Microsoft with their Copilot feature in their entire Microsoft Office suite, and that's going to be generally available on November 1st. So you have everyone preparing for the general availability of Copilot in Office tools and preparing their organization for that gain in efficiency. But what's really interesting is what Amazon has been doing with their Amazon Bedrock product and their agents feature for Amazon Bedrock, which is they are allowing their AI models to call and interact with APIs. So at its base, when you think about it, it's really not that surprising because it comes from the chatbot days where you want to tell a chatbot, change my order, fix the shipping, cancel this, add that. So it needed to interact with multiple systems. So it had to call APIs. But when you think about the broader ramifications of what that means, that is a major game changer because the AI is not stuck in the box anymore. It can then interact with anything, any system it needs to interact with to accomplish the task. And that's a little scary, but also extremely promising for functionality.
It's extremely promising, but if I'm an LP and I get a check, right, and that check, I don't know why I got that check from my participation in this limited partnership that owns real estate, and I used to trust. Well, I trust Kevin, right? He's my GP, and he's got good brands. He's got State Street underneath him, and then he's got Deloitte working with State Street, and whatever it might be, right? Or SS&C, or Apex, or pick somebody, Bank of New York, EY, PwC. I'm trying to make sure all the people we work with covering, and we got all these people that U.S. Bank, and I'm now in trouble. I shouldn't have done that. I should have just used one. But for everybody else, we love you. And we're, as you do this, you trusted Kevin. But if this is being processed by AI and you don't trust a brand, you have to have a mechanism of audit for proof of that process and proof of origin of the data going through those calculations and those logic chains, right? Otherwise, the AI can't plug into all these things. Now, the fact that this functionality exists, what does that mean? What if we say, Cushman and Wakefield, we want you to value this building. Boom, they value that building. Plug this data into an AVM, and I want you to give me daily valuations until we value it again next month. And oh, by the way, I want you to plug this in, and I want you to tell me what the other comps are in the top 80 markets to this asset. So that if I am a bank in Sao Paulo and I want to invest in Topeka, I can correlate it to assets that I know and understand into neighborhoods and marks that I can understand. If I'm a portfolio manager in CalPERS and I want to, or I'm at an insurance company and I've got capital reserves of 20% because I hold this real estate at Schedule BA and I want to move it to Schedule A, I need to show a comp using ASC 815 in order to get that better accounting treatment. AI can go get you those comps right now. Show me the last 100 real estate trades on assets that have a correlation or an R squared of 92 or above in these top 100 MSAs. Bam, that kind of stuff can happen. But if you're doing 10-finger manual automation to get your data in, you're missing this, right? We got to get a mechanism where you can participate. And let me ask you a question. Kevin, when you think about what is the on-ramp for this innovation being able to be distributed broadly, what is step one? What is step two? What is step three for big data and Kevin's been in this business long enough that it was, his degree was not in data science, it was decision science, right? As we think about data, how do we get engaged in this? How do we start?
Well, I'm going to back up just a little because this is kind of the same moment that early in the 20th century, the electric drill and pneumatic tools greatly extended the function of human work, right? Humans no longer had to lower the car body onto the chassis. They no longer had to tighten the individual bolts. But the key thing that made that a productive activity was the assembly line, was saying these processes need to happen in a particular order. And so you can call it an assembly line, you can call it a pipeline, you can call it an automated process. But to me, the on-ramp is having a defined sequence of activities and knowing which AI tools plug in at the moment of the process. That if you just took a guy and gave him an electric drill and told him to build a car, he could clearly do it faster than if all he had was a manual screwdriver. But what really changed that was an assembly line, a set of defined processes to guide that work. So I think the thing that most people are missing is, yes, you can strike up a conversation with a chatbot, but that isn't productive work until it happens in some sort of defined sequence. So I think the first thing is understanding the different interactions that you and your data want to have, and having some way of putting those in order. And then the second step is understanding that different interactions with your data require different AI models.
And let's talk about that, right? Like very specifically, we're working right now on a private credit repo marketplace in the Middle East. And if you don't understand and have the ability to see what is the raw data on the collateral, right? And then you don't have the ability to pull that data in and feed it into third-party valuation marks or companies that can set a mark that can and also feed an AVM. The ability for this repo credit marketplace, we need to say this is the assembly line. We need to tokenize the asset or the loan, and we need to understand the asset. We need to be able to surveil the asset that sits in a booking center in one of 4 jurisdictions around the world. Then we create a secondary trusted party that's going to create an IOU. We're going to create that. We're going to deliver cash against it, and we're creating liquidity against it. But that's the assembly line, right? And the assembly line can't be. And I understand every time we do something first, we need to do it hand done the first time, but it does not scale unless we can deliver the value and the automation, right, of that assembly line. So Kevin, thank you for that. Albert, anything you want to add to that?
There's a lot to say. I think equally important is to have definition and have clarity on how the systems interact with each other. And I think that really blockchain is the solution for how to get the interaction with it between AIs under control, because you really need anchored inputs, origins, building blocks at the beginning, and then you need proof and output and verification, so that there's no sleight of hand at the output
and attribution, and that with attribution,
of course, right. Of course. So we've already seen the danger of not having that. There was a lawyer who was using AI for preparing for a court case, and the AI made up cases that he then cited in a brief and submitted to the judge. And he actually got his law license suspended for that. But imagine, a counterparty in a trade, and you're telling the AIs to trust at some level, but verify, but they don't have access to the data, and they're you're at an impasse and you're stuck. Rules of the road are good for everybody, because right now, using the analogy of the car, everyone's building their own car, building their own AI, and that's great because it's way better than walking, and that's wonderful. But it's not very useful if there's no rules to the road, and it's too dangerous to even use it because of the way that everyone else is using it. And so it's a really important thing for there to be control, so that everyone can benefit, and more importantly, get the expected result out of everyone being on the road at the same time.
And it is the little things, the guardrails, the paved roads, the street lights that allow you to move fast. And when you start to remove individual pieces, the guardrails, right? And let's talk about a guardrail, the ability to provide attribution. Where did this come from? So that the next person down the line gets it. Otherwise, they redo the work, which in alts is how it's done today as a form of verification, right? Everybody redoes the previous guy's job before him as a mechanism to do so. We don't need to do that again. We can provide input, output, proof of process, and we can say, okay, I can now rely on this data. That allows me to speed up this trust, right? And those guardrails, that street light of auditability. My auditor is going to want to audit this. They're going to do a spot audit on 5% or 3% or 2% of all the transactions. And if they can't do that, people are going to choke down the velocity, right? In order to allow the mechanism to commute trust. And we've got to have these mechanisms of audit, transparency, collaboration in order for the data to move down the assembly line, so that my home equity loan, my mezz debt into a real estate, the mezz debt or the senior debt on a refinery asset, on a pipeline, on a railroad, we got to have proof of process of data. And this is, you talked about the chatbots and the APIs and what does that mean, et cetera, right? Let's talk a little bit about some of these things, right? Albert, I mentioned this in a post online today, right? We were talking about extending foundation models to understand user requests, break down tasks, right, Kevin? That's the logic, that's the assembly line, right? Collect additional information from a user through natural language conversation, take actions to fulfill customer requests, right? Make API calls, right, to carry out actions, augment performance and accuracy. Relate that to securities. Relate that to real estate trading. Relate that to private credit. So I'm a portfolio manager in some type of an environment. How is this at maturation going to benefit me?
Sure, that's a great question. So at Inveniam, we use something called retrieval augmented generation, which basically means that we allow you to embed a knowledge base in order to fuel the AI's insights. So you connect, all your data, all the documents that you deal with, everything about your business, and it learns a lot about your business based on those things. And what it allows it to do is have a much higher degree of accuracy, get you answers much faster, and all the efficiency gains that you described. So that results in an enormous amount of saved time, but also new opportunities that didn't exist before. When due diligence takes minutes instead of weeks, all of a sudden there are opportunities that may have passed you by in the amount of time that you had to get them done, but now are completely possible as a result of those increased efficiencies.
Let me give an example. Right now, the ability for a large real estate asset to trade is limited because the need to evaluate that building is done where people say, I want to look at this building, this building, this building, but the cost of the due diligence might be $300,000, $500,000, and you got to do structural engineering. There's a ton of work that needs to happen going into this. Just the ability to say, are there hazardous materials in the building? Can we rely on the previous versions? Are there any things that would cause me to think that they're in there? Do I need to redo the structural? What just having AI say these buildings are likely to cost less in diligence for you to do, to have a human being actually look at the foundations. You know what I mean? In a primary inspection, like that alone is enormously valuable in providing this mechanism for automation. Kevin, I want to turn it over to you a little bit, where we talk about this agents plugging into each other and Tim Berners-Lee and the guardrails and speaking to one another fast. How does this trust and the proof of process speed the logic up as we're going into these alts trading? And what is that going to mean to price discovery? And what is that going to mean to actual primary and secondary distribution of alts digitally?
Right. So I think we already know from the aircraft value business what the answer to the value of quality records are and the availability of them. That for an aircraft, inadequate maintenance records are a 10% ding on value, and missing maintenance records cut the value of an aircraft in half. And it's just an easy shorthand that if the humans have to re-diligence an aircraft from scratch, the aircraft is worth half of what it is if it has current records. And I think that we will start to see that bifurcation of any of these other assets into ones that have good data and ones that don't. I may have jumped right. I jumped over probably some intermediate points there, but
well, no. Let's use the. I love that example, right, of the aircraft. I used to say that the only value proposition of smart buildings was that somebody could control your air conditioning from New Jersey, right? That was the only value of a building historically. When you're going to be able to put your smart building technology into a building and affect the cap rate of that building is when you will have total adoption of smart building systems going into buildings, right? The moment you can get a lower cost of capital, you can sell your building, you can keep it on the market at all times, it's going to change that. This is also the case because right now when we monitor pipelines, we monitor them typically from a catastrophic and a risk perspective, not from an optimization perspective, from a capital perspective. When we're able to go from airplane leasing, where we say, okay, we have this whole fleet of good performing assets that we know that they're being well maintained, et cetera, and I'm going to lease them. But the moment we can start to tag profitable seats in profitable routes that are connected to specific planes is when we're going to have the most efficient capital going into airplane leasing instead of against a whole fleet. And we don't know how that plane is going to be used against specific routes and what the profitability is of that route per day between cities and the attribution. This is where AI and that process is going to explode this. And when we go
to
to
attribution, I think that was the other, that was the kind of thing that's implied in FAA maintenance records, is that they're done by a qualified technician at a certain time, in a certain order, and that you can say that not only was this work done, but it was done by a certain person on a certain day, and that attribution is a key part of that. Your question to me was how fast and in what way will it affect, and I have to say, I have this caveat in using the aircraft analogy. There is this very important attribution thing that is present in aircraft that we need to see in these other assets and processes on their data.
Kevin, you know what's amazing about that example is that in that exact industry, the way that they maintain those standards is to use a ledger. They literally have a book that each pilot enters everything into, that none of them control, that keeps all that information. It's just fascinating to me that that's where they ended up.
Yeah, I mean, the ledger, whether you're talking about a county ledger, right, and where, on what page was the last entry on this building, right, in this county, of an ownership transfer, it was in book 7, on page 1042, right, and the ability to actually begin to track, and instead of just, I have to scan all the ledgers and go back. And this ability to say, okay, where does the link to the previous versions? And these ledgers, the distributed ledger, this triple party, or the triple ledger entry system, right, where we have multiple parties agreeing, whether it's permissioned or public, that this is the state of the ledger, allows people to commute trust in many, 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 many things. How often people are walking in a building, right? The CO2 blooms when fourth graders run into their classroom post recess, right? And what is that CO2 bloom going to do? And then where's the oxygen replacement going to be? And is there mold, that's growing in a building, where we're connecting all that from LED sensors? The ability to provide that trust matters to those people who it matters to. If you have a fourth grade daughter who's got asthma, you care, right? And you want to say, can I trust that? Do I see that data? How do I know it's there? How do I get to it real time? And this data is out there. It already exists. Everything that we need for the trading of private market assets digitally in a fully efficient marketplace exists. It's just not connected, and we don't trust it, right? And Albert, how do we begin taking all of this data and connecting it in that trustworthy route? And what is AI going to do? And where is it going to begin in one silo? And where's the connection going to be, or the next one? And then how are we going to connect those silos?
So I think it's important to kind of put this out there and just say it out loud so that everyone is clear. But if you are a business and you don't have a plan on how you are going to integrate AI into your operations, you are behind, and you are on the fast track to becoming extinct, and all the pros and cons that come with that. But what you guys just pointed out about the contextual knowledge that can be important, for a lot of transactions, you get to like a compliance stage, and then that gives you the yes or no. And when something gets the red light at that point, oh, you can't do it, you're already too invested in real estate, you can only have this much percentage, you can't do that. That's a major loss of efficiency and the opportunity cost. And it's almost impossible to keep every possible relevant factor in mind as you're going through that process. You have to pick steps to do because of workforce and payroll and just all the people that you have involved. But an AI can prevent those mistakes, which are tremendously valuable, and narrow the opportunities to the things that matter. But the efficiency gains alone, look, eventually the market is going to be the force that makes all this happen. The ones that are able to adapt and innovate, as they always have, will survive and thrive. And the ones that don't will fall by the wayside. It's just happening faster than it ever has.
And this adaptation is there is an implicit bias where people go, oh my gosh, is all this technology going to make half the world's workers suddenly become fully incompetent? Right? No. Right? Real intelligence they're going to be able to be used. The question is, who can adapt their teams and extract the greatest amount of value from the data and process that and then deliver that to their end customer. And that adaptation is what matters, and the ability to sell it. And to the degree that you can say, I'm going to commoditize this thing that was already commoditized to a degree when it moved offshore from the US to other parts of lower cost service providing nations, right? Let's use India as an example, which has this tremendous educated workforce. But many of these educated workforce members are doing 10-finger automation. And one of the reasons everybody is so bullish on India is all that training connected up to ingenuity and creativity is creating an explosion of entrepreneurial activity where people are saying, I've been doing this for a long time, and I think there's a better way to do it, right? And if we can have AI replace that and unlock that creative potential, that's where we're going to see markets explode. But there's got to be a minimum level of trust and competence.
So Pat, I want to follow up on that, because you said something very interesting to me the other day, and I thought it was very visionary. And I'd love to hear how you got to this. AI is very important, but developing your own AI from scratch is not really the method. It's essentially a commodity, essentially a utility, that other factors are going to be a lot more important in how you use it and how it applies to your business. So what made you understand that years ago and drive the direction of the company accordingly?
I'm going to give a bad answer, but ask me 3 more times and I'll have a really good answer, right, in about 4 months. But when we really think about where value is on data, it is in the synthesis, right? It is not in the data collection and in creating the taxonomy. And as we think about the maturation level of knowledge, right? When we go to inclination, to belief, to trust, to knowledge, right? What do we have faith in? And I'm going to use a puzzle example, right? I have a puzzle that I do with my daughters, right? And so I'm with my 3-year-old daughter, and there's 30 pieces in the little puzzle, and each one's a big piece. And she knows what that puzzle is supposed to look like. I don't. Do you know what I mean? And she can actually move it forward much more. And then halfway through, I go, oh, it's a pony, or oh, it's a unicorn, or oh, it's this, right? And then quickly I can start to try and keep up with my 3-year-old daughter, who's worked that puzzle 4 times that day. Do you know what I mean? And it's my first go. As we can begin to perceive the picture, that as we form more data points of the puzzle, we can move faster on that. The first key is literally assembling the data elements, flipping all the puzzle pieces up so they're all facing up, right? And getting the edge pieces. And now we start, right? And we're going from the 30 piece puzzle to the 1,000. And we can begin to see what's happening. When we think about that in a trade, I want to buy, I want to sell, I want to loan, I want to liquidate. The more we can assemble the data elements quickly, we deliver the ability for that really smart synthetic function of the trader who's seen that puzzle 1,000 times on this type of building, this type of infrastructure asset, this type of credit, and he'll execute the trade. And as he executes the trade quicker, he makes more money, right? He sees what's happening in the market. So step 1 is delivery of data that we can trust. But that really is step 1. Step 2 is when we have that assembly line of functions that gives price discovery and trust. So the person doing synthesis trusts the data, the puzzle pieces, that this puzzle piece actually belongs to this puzzle, not a different one. Do you know what I mean? And by the way, if you've ever had kids, that's the biggest problem you have, keeping the puzzle pieces separate, right? And this is, well, biggest problem as it relates to puzzle. This is what we're talking about, which is how do we facilitate trust so that the highest value synthesis can assemble the data and act the quickest. The assembling of the data, there are hundreds of people. It is shark-infested waters. There are so many people there, right? 73 strings. Let's go to chronograph. Let's go to, I can't believe I can't, canoe, right? We could just start listing more and more and more of these various different extraction tools. AI is eating their lunch. AI is eating their lunch. They were building a specific tool that could do one thing. AI is eating their lunch. Full stop. Canoe's got to start plugging in and delivering that. And by the way, we're great. We love Canoe. We love 73 strings. We love, OpenAI. We love AWS. We love Google. We love Mosaic. You name it. We're going to use whichever one the client wants to use that's most efficient. And all Invenium is doing is delivering attribution, right? Attribution and proof of process. And so that is the part that enables the guy who actually has the most value, the synthesis, to bring in the data, perceive it correctly, and trust it. And by the way, we're the only ones doing this. I don't know that there's another firm out there doing what we do, which is commuting trust and providing proof of process, and delivering that full attribution to how multiple compute systems ingest data. And it is, in fact, how agents work together in the vision of what Tim Berners-Lee was saying in Semantic Web.
No one needed guardrails on the highway until the cars ran a certain speed, right, Kevin?
That's correct. I mean, the other one I'm thinking, there weren't route numbers until Rand McNally realized that the names of the roads changed every time you left one town and entered the next. So that's what Rand McNally is famous for from a data science standpoint, is route numbers. Overlaying numbers on top of what had just been names.
Yeah, and evolution leads to realization of needs as our world gets bigger. And we're not going to stop creating data, right? There's going to be more and more and more data. And the solution is not put it all in one big giant database, right? And if we just make the one ring to rule them all, I'll only use it for good, right? No, we need, and not one big database to rule them all. People are going to want to control their own data. They're going to want to be their own oracle. They want to control from the edge. Guys, if there's anybody who has any questions for us, please let us know. We're putting some interesting stuff up in the LinkedIn chat. Let me go around while we wait for any questions. Kevin, any comments? Any last comments you want? I love the Rand McNally data science. But any other comments you have for us?
Well, it goes back. Henry Ford was present when a whole bunch of different machines were being invented. The assembly line as a machine, the automobile as a machine, and all those power tools as a machine. I think the answer to Albert of how did Inveniam end up where it is that, like Henry Ford, we focused sort of on the end user. And it was kind of Pat's background as a trader and as someone who needed to price assets and what sort of data he needed to get through his day, that had us end up focusing, like Henry Ford, on the car. And yeah, we also had to imagine assembly line, but somehow we also knew it wasn't going to be our job to invent the drill and the winch and the all the other tools. And now we are in the happy position of being able to say, as better hand tools get invented, as better electric tools and sensors get invented, we plug them into our assembly line.
Our data assembly line. Our data
Right.
assembly line.
Having a data, just imagining that there would be a data assembly line that at the end would put out data that had to be trusted and that had to be right, and that you had to know, uh, deep footnoting. I don't think we knew that that AIs were going to hallucinate. Pat knew that traders hallucinated, but we didn't know that AI hallucination was going to be a problem. We just knew that people needed footnotes. It was kind of, and we are in a happy position of saying, look, whatever your ARs are doing, they need this attribution. They need to be able to say where they got the number. And
Kevin, I don't think we knew, and even though we made several suppositions and we thought this was way, we knew what we were doing would be needed. We didn't know exactly how it would evidence the need, and we actually imagined something a little different than we did. But man, now that we're here and AI is taken off, this is needed in force at scale for every alternatives manager as they manage the data, pre-trade, post-trade, servicing these assets, and then feeding these into these other compute systems. What are the right assets that correlate to this, right? What's the right comp set? What is my AVM? How do I value this asset? How do I discriminate against certain types of assets I don't want to own or that I do want to own, right? How can I lend against this asset at scale, at speed? How can I trust this data? This is where we're going. Albert, give us any comments as we think about process, which is automation, AI, discovery, extraction, attribution, which is trust, and distributed data, which is trust, right? How do these things come together, and what are they going to form for the future of capital markets?
Big question. So I like the Henry Ford example in this case, because he also said, if I had asked my customers what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. And so I actually think there's a lot of credit due for being able to point to what the future would hold and what would be necessary to govern that future. So with that in mind, we still have the last few applications slots open for the alpha of our Inveniam AI release. So if you're interested in that, we'll drop a link in the chat. Someone could do that, please. Last chance, literally last call. So we're making those final selections now, and we'll be sending out invitation shortly.
And I want to I'm going to use a last example, right? We have one of our shareholders is a fairly famous Bitcoin guy, Mike Kimeransky, or Como, who got DRW into it. It was the first CEO of Cumberland Assets, and he was telling me a story about when he was going to be a trader at he was interviewing for a job at University of Chicago, and somebody had said, hey, you should apply for this quant trading position. And he had gotten to University of Chicago. He had a math degree, and he's filling out showing that he can do math. He's like, literally, this is why I got a math degree, right? And he's like, this is so dumb. And he went into the conversation, and the guy who was talking to him wasn't that interested. And then he found out that Mike had played soccer at University of Chicago. He's like, oh. And the reason he liked it is because Mike in the pit wouldn't give up his spot as quickly. So he was smart enough mathematically. He was a clever guy, but also in the old days, you had to be able to physically protect your spot close to the data, right? In order to get trades done. Otherwise, you would be pushed out by the bigger guys. And so we got hired. Within just a few years, that no longer was the case. Traders look different than they did 40 years ago. Physically, they look different. Intellectually, they look different. Their skill sets are different. Investment bankers are about to go through the same change, right? If you're an investment bank and you are not in on this, you're going to be paying catch up. You got to lean into this. We're super excited about all these changes that are happening. Please work with Inveniam. We're doing a number of consulting engagements with some of these fund admins, working with these alt players. We're delivering our software to third parties. We're building some new marketplaces for folks. We're super excited because all these technologies, they're converging. right? And as we do so in the convergence, as we make it useful, we're starting to see the ability to, create energy instead of just try and stop diminution of energy throughput. Do you know what I mean? And it's an exciting moment. Kevin, thanks for that slight smile as I was trying to make an analogy. So I think, guys, that's it. Anything else, Kevin or Albert, before we go?
Well, I'm going to say that you were smart and I was lucky that though we weren't necessarily crypto maximalists, we were distributed maximalists, and saying that a ledger that exists all over the world was going to change a lot of things, and to be thinking a lot about that. And I just also want to get off a humorous observation. We've seen what a difference it makes now that people can work from home. I mean, that's essentially what you were saying about how traders are physically different than when they had to elbow their way into a pit. Now that traders can work from home, it's a different set of criteria that you apply. And distributed ledgers mean that data can work from home. It can work at rest in the systems where it originates. And so the same way that people have to reimagine the office in a work from home world, people need to reimagine what a data room looks like when data is working from home.
Thank you, everybody.